Good evening. It's such a pleasure to be here at the Oxford Union. Thank you so much for having me tonight. And I would like to thank especially to Charlie, the Vice President, that is hosting me. Thank you, Charlie. And thank you, everyone, for coming. I was posted to be ambassador here in the UK 2 years ago. And I would like to share with you something very surprising. Everyone is curious what will be his first diplomatic experience. Is it going to be the meeting with the Queen? Or is it going to be a meeting with some colleague ambassadors, like the American ambassadors? I was thinking to myself, what will be my first diplomatic experience when I came to London? And I will surprise you all when I will say that my first diplomatic meeting was not with a European ambassador, not with a Far East ambassador. It was actually with my Arab colleagues. The topic of my lecture is New Middle East. And one of the things I want to share with you is how much the Middle East has changed since my predecessor was studying here and speaking with the same students, maybe different students, maybe new students, about the challenges of the Middle East. So when my predecessor was standing here, he said historically Israel signed 2 peace agreements, one with Egypt and one with Jordan. But since that, on September 2020, another historic step happened between us, the Israelis, and the Arab world. And this step is called the Abraham Accords. I would like to share with you a very funny moment that I had. I was hosting for dinner the Bahraini ambassador. So the Abraham Accords, just to fill you with the details, was a historic peace agreement, was initiated by both the leaders of our countries and supported by the US administration. And basically, for me, as Israeli, for many years, I couldn't travel to Dubai. And just last year, on Expo Dubai, 300,000 Israelis came to visit. Think about this gap. For all my life, I couldn't travel there. And now suddenly, many Israelis are going there, and they're being accepted in such a big warmth. People are so happy to see them. So this is not just a political agreement. We are talking here about people-to-people shift in mindset, shift in the hearts and minds of people. And when we are talking about the Middle East, it's very important to understand that we are now in a time in history where more than ever, more and more countries want to build this amazing peace coalition with Israel. And the biggest question is, of course, what made it happen? And I want just to go backwards. For us, for many years, we wanted to reach out to peace with all our neighbors. All our leaders, starting from our first Prime Minister, David Ben-Gurion, through the first Prime Minister that actually signed the peace agreement, Menachem Begin. Everyone wanted to reach the same goal. Everyone wanted peace. And in the last years, peace became reality. And how was this reality coming into the world? After so many years, we've been trying, and suddenly it happened. And the truth is, and the reality is, that the Middle East has changed in a way that more and more countries realize that without having serious cooperation with Israel, the challenges in the region can't be addressed properly. And what we feel today more than ever, that Israel today is standing in one of its best points with the Arab world. So we have more friends in the Arab world than ever. Today we can go and travel in the Arab world. It's part of the Israeli way of looking at the region as some place that is open to us. And I think even more important, I think today more than ever, Arab people in all those countries know that Israel is a friend, that they can have business with Israel, they can have research and development fund like we just had with the UAE. Business is thriving, and all this thing is happening because also on the people-to-people level, something dramatic happened. But of course, there is still the Palestinian issue. And I don't want to avoid that. Because sometimes when you're thinking about Israel, the first thing that you're thinking is the country that is having this conflict. And I would like to say that since I was a young girl, all Israeli prime ministers usually had one goal: to solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And the biggest question is, what is the difference? Why it worked out with Egypt, with Jordan, with the UAE, with Bahrain, with Morocco, so many other countries find it easy to come and have peace agreement with Israel, but it didn't happen with the Palestinians. And I would like to share with you some of my thoughts, and I'll be very, very open to your questions after I'll finish my brief. So one of the reasons that there is no peace between Israelis and Palestinians is because of the words that is being chanted outside. Let's think about the demonstration outside. People are saying, and sometimes I think people don't listen to the words, because it's okay to demonstrate. Free country, just like Israel. UK and Israel are democracies. But what are they saying? Listen to the words. They're saying, and listen to this, because it's coming all the way through this room. Between the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Have you seen the map of the Middle East? Does it leave any space to Israel to exist? Does it leave any space to Israel to exist? Probably not. And between the river to the sea, the meaning of this thing they're chanting out there is Israel shouldn't exist. This is a very radical thing to say. Think about all the countries in the world. Most of the countries are not even democracies. Think about almost 200 countries that can vote in the UN. Some of them don't respect human rights. Some of them do really bad things to other people. But can you imagine other ambassador walking into Oxford Union and people outside are not shouting and screaming something against him or against his country. They're basically shouting that his country shouldn't exist. This is a very radical thing to say. No other country in the world gets even the concept and the idea that they shouldn't exist. And just learning the Jewish history, unfortunately we know that sometimes those radical ideas bring also some radical actions. And you don't want to be part of a group that says some people don't have the right to exist. It's very, very radical. So if the people that were sitting there were just opening the map of the Middle East, they would have realized they're not promoting peace. They're actually distancing peace. And one of the problems, again, is that the people that are advocating today the conflict and the issues around the conflict basically are saying Israel shouldn't exist. And you can't start negotiation when people are denying the right of the Jewish people to have a Jewish homeland. And I think that it's, again, the duty of the people sitting in this room that care, that want to listen, that want to speak up, to speak for peace, because this is our duty. We need to think about the next generations. And in order to achieve peace, you can't say from the river to the sea, Palestine is free. And I think that this is one barrier that we all need to face, and we shouldn't take this slogan as a slogan that promotes peace. It actually promotes the elimination of Israel, which is something that I believe that no one in this room and many people in this country don't want to happen. The second barrier, when it comes to the Palestinian issue, and again, 6 different Israeli prime ministers tried to solve the problem. Many negotiation was going on, many international summits, many leaders from all around the world that tried to create valid solution. They missed something that happened in 2006. In 2006, there was a dramatic election held among the Palestinians in Gaza Strip. And this election had a result. The result was Hamas was elected to be the former leader of the Gaza Strip, and the alternative, the PLO leaders, basically, and it was really horrific to see that, the leaders were being thrown from high buildings all around, and the result was a terror regime controlling half of the Palestinians that are living in Gaza. And Hamas is recognized in this country as a terror organization, also in USA, also in the EU. Think about it for a second. There is a recognized terror organization that is the representative of 50% of the Palestinians. And more than that, the leader of this terror organization is calling to brutally kill Jews in the streets of Israel using axes, something that unfortunately we've seen that happened in the last month. 19 Israelis were killed brutally by a Palestinian terrorist that were incited with those kind of things. I know many Israeli leaders have different approach to how peace should look like. I think none of Israeli leaders think that peace starts when people take axes and killing other people in the streets. And I think this is the gap. This is the gap that it can't be bridged just by saying, sit and negotiate, or just by throwing formulas. The truth is, and if you're asking me where it starts with education. It starts with the basic idea that when I meet someone that is coming from the Palestinian world, he wants to see peace for our children. And I'm a mother of 3 young daughters. Every mother, when a child is born in Israel, is believing and hoping we don't need ever in the future to use force because we believe in peace. And I think that this is where the international community throughout the years missed an opportunity to invest in the real thing, which is educating the young generation. In order to achieve peace, you always need 2 ingredients: brave leaders, but also people-to-people motivation. And this is the thing we missed in the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. And I think, till today, many people still believe in some myths about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. One of the myths is the Israeli settlements. Some people saying Jews cannot live in certain places in Israel. Obviously, when we look back in history, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict didn't start when settlements started to be built. In 1967, on the Six-Day War, when Israelis started to go back to their homeland in Judea and Samaria after being attacked from the Arab world, this is when the Jewish community started to be built. But the conflict is 100 years old. The PLO was established in 1964, no connection to settlements. And then if we move forward in 2005, Israel made a dramatic political step. It was called the disengagement. Israel uprooted all its settlements in the Gaza Strip, and we were hoping for a better future. Unfortunately, even when Israel withdrew to the international border, it didn't help. And here comes the real tragedy. When Gaza was held by Hamas in 2006, massive international support started to get into Gaza. We're speaking about billions of dollars and euros that were given by the international community, and they call it reconstruction of Gaza, building of Gaza. And some people believe that Gaza is going to be a new Singapore. What was the real thing that happened with this money? So unfortunately, some of this money was misused. And instead of building hotels, restaurants, nice places for people to enjoy themselves and enjoy their life, underneath city was built with tunnels that had just one goal: to attack Israeli civilians, to attack innocent Israeli children in their schools, in their kindergartens. And a whole industry started to happen that was firing rockets on our cities and communities. I think in order to have a better future, we also need to speak about that, how the international money is being used by the Palestinian leadership, and how we can get to the point where every single support is being used to the right cause and not for terrorism. The third thing I want to share with you, and I'm sure you have many questions and more to ask, is about UK-Israel relations. As an ambassador, I'm very proud that some massive part of my work is the great cooperation I have with my Arab colleagues. But the majority of my work is to build better future to Israel and the UK. And Israel and the UK are in one of really its best points in history. One of the things that is happening at the moment between our two governments and our really two communities, maybe I should say, is the health cooperation. COVID got us to understand and realize that we can't solve health problems without addressing a global cooperation. And I think that what started as a challenge that was a global challenge like the pandemic created massive cooperation between our best people, our scientists and our doctors. And today we are building a program about the future hospitals, how people want to get their medical assistant in the future. What are the challenges? Both our countries, we have public service of the best doctors in the world. And I'm really, really proud that the Israeli health system, together with the amazing British health system, the NHS, does lots of cooperation that is saving life. Another aspect of saving life is the security cooperation. Israel and the UK are close and intimate allies when it comes to security. Our both intelligence units are doing amazing work in saving lives by sharing intelligence. And I think it's almost on a monthly basis that we host security delegations that do the best work between our security agencies coming from the Israeli army, the Israeli forces, and also coming from the Israeli intelligence services, together with the British ones. The third issue, which I think everyone can celebrate, is a new trade deal between Israel and the UK. We just launched the process and started it, but I think in the future, every country wants to be connected to countries that innovate, and with the technological abilities that Israel is bringing to the table, together with the leading power of British economy, we're going to have a new trade deal very soon, I hope. So this is my work, and I'm happy to share it with you. And I'm very, very optimistic about the future of our region. And I hope that the Abraham Accords will inspire all our neighbors to come and be part of the peace circle. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for those opening remarks. We'll do about 20-25 minutes of questions from me and then open up to the floor. We'll start, as you started, talking about the Abraham Accords and how, as you said, they mark a meaningful change for Middle Eastern diplomacy. Given that there's been a differing response from various Arab states to the Abraham Accords and to the normalization of relations with Israel, do you think that the Abraham Accords mark an end to Pan-Arabism?
Obviously, this was my speech. I think yes. I think in a way, we're speaking today about totally different challenges than we had when Israel was established. And it's quite obvious to me that the Arab world today is divided into the moderate Arab countries that want to cooperate, want to have strong coalition with countries like Israel, and to build a better future to our region and to move forward, especially on the aspects of technology and all the climate issues that we have in our region. And as opposed to countries like Iran, and I'm sure you're going to ask me about it, that are spreading radicalization and want to take us back to the medieval ages.
So where does Saudi Arabia fall on that spectrum? Where is Israel currently looking at normalizing relations with Saudi Arabia? Can we expect it in the coming years or months?
Many people are asking me that, so I think that Saudi Arabia was again one of the close circle when we started to have more deep security relations with the Arab world. It's not yet ready to be normalized like we had with the Abraham Accords countries, but I do believe in the future we do call all our Arab friends in the world, in the Arab world, to be part of this amazing momentum of peace. So I can't tell you it's something that can happen in the coming year, but it's definitely the way to go. We call everyone to join the peace circle.
Is part of the desire to normalize relations with Arab states and Gulf states to act as a counterweight to Iran within the Middle East?
I think Iran is just one ingredient of that. It's not the whole story. And this is why I was telling you about the people-to-people aspect, the R&D aspect, the trade aspect, because eventually relationship between countries is not based on one pillar. And I think Iran is a major threat to the future of the Middle East, but not just for the Middle East. When I speak to all the British officials, they all say the same. They all say that Iran is a huge threat to the Western world, not just to Israel, not just, I mean, just to speak maybe a little bit, if you open the Iranian issue, I said it's very radical to say that that Israel shouldn't exist, but this is a country that is not just saying that Israel shouldn't exist, it's actually working that Israel won't exist. And it's working by its proxies, Hezbollah, again, recognized terror organization that is sitting in our northern border, Hamas, a recognized terror organization that is sitting in our southern border, the Houthis in Yemen, all those are Iranian proxies. So Iran, after the Islamic Revolution, is a very radical force, doesn't believe in democracy, doesn't believe in human rights, and definitely doesn't want Israel to exist because the leadership are declaring on it day and night. So this is the reality, and this very, very dangerous regime wants to have nuclear power. So Israel today is fighting with its new friends, together with our old friends, like the UK. We are fighting this very dangerous regime.
We'll move on to Iran properly in a second, but a couple more questions on the Abraham Accords first. You said repeatedly how Israel and her new friends will be playing more of a role together, research and development and trade. Do you think that as Israel becomes less isolated, that Israel will play a larger role in the region in terms of influencing and spreading democracy, women's rights, LGBTQ+ rights?
That's actually a very, very serious challenge, because democracy is not a thing that is built in one day. I think that you need to have a process. And basically, as a democracy, we believe that every country should adopt the vision of equality, and the very basic values of democracy is something that we truly believe in. But knowing from history and from many attempts of many Western countries to change the way the Arab world is working, it's not a thing that you can impose. So basically, of course, when we speak about partnership and friendships, we do want to have shared values as well. But this is a thing I do here in the UK when we have our shared values.
So you think that in the long term, Israel will work to promote values of democracy and...
We do that all the time, but we're not imposing it, because this is not something that is possible.
You also mentioned the climate problems facing the region, and part of the Abraham Accords deal with Jordan, I believe, was that Israel will build renewable energy sources in Jordanian territory, and they will build desalination plants in Israeli territory. What are the major climate problems facing the Middle East, and is Israel worried about them?
Yes, climate is a serious issue, I think, globally, and we participated in COP26 here in Glasgow, and we had we had maybe the second largest delegation. We came with our energy minister. I mean, of course, our prime minister came, and one of the things we deal with is desert midbul. What's the proper way to say? Like midbul, desert. Desertification. So one of the things we have as a serious problem since Israel was born is the fact that we live in desert areas. 2/3 of Israel is a desert, and in order to find solutions to that, Israel has become one of the top countries that have water solutions. And this is a thing we can definitely share with our friends all around the world. Israel today, some of the Israeli companies are basically making miracles. I was hosting just a few weeks ago, actually it's a very interesting story, Israeli company called Watergen. So they were hosted by Prince Charles in Buckingham Palace in a beautiful event that the idea was to find all the companies around the world that are dealing with climate problems. And there were many Israeli businesses that were elected to participate in this beautiful dinner. And they came to report about the experience, and they said, we are offering something that almost doesn't have a competition, because they also do things that are available to buy in like a minimum rate. And this is the thing that is appealing to many countries that can afford expensive solutions. So one of the things we do is we supply water solutions to Africa, to Brazil, to many countries around the world that are dealing with water issues. And this is a thing that Israel, again, is a leading country in technology. So water is a serious issue. And when it comes to agriculture solutions, again, we do lots of work together. And I think the third issue, which is something we all face because of the Russia-Ukraine crisis, is the issue of energy. The world is having today a major energy crisis. And one of the things that is happening at the moment, it's just fresh and new from yesterday, we just now made an incredible cooperation together with our partners, with the Egyptians, and we are going to export natural gas to the EU because of the problems that Europe is facing because of the war. So I think altogether it's a real revolution that combines again the two pillars that I mentioned in my speech: the peace and the new coalitions that are being created in the Middle East, together with the fact that Israel is a leading technological country.
Moving on then to Iran, as promised. This last year has seen concerted efforts to resurrect the JCPOA Iran nuclear deal. Now there's a very concentrated period of negotiations in Vienna and Munich earlier this year, and both Iran and the United States have claimed that a new deal is very close. Does Israel feel betrayed by this process?
First of all, at the moment it looks like a deal is not even in the options of both. The Americans made it very clear that the IRGC is going to remain recognized as a terror organization, and the Iranians at the moment and the Americans are very far away from any kind of solution to that. So we definitely don't feel betrayed because of one reason. We always say that our security is being handled with our security power and our forces. So we never rely on other people to solve security problems that we need to deal with. This is the basic idea of having an independent state. But when it comes to cooperation with countries like the UK, I mean, this is where I find the energy of my work. I find the similarities in the way we think about the Iranian issue. We both agree Iran shouldn't have nuclear power. We both agree how dangerous the regime is. We both agree that this is the major power that creates destabilization of the Middle East. And all together, maybe we have a little bit of differences between, the tactics in the way to get there. But I think when you summarize it, I think our allies know exactly what's the problem. And I think we work together very hard in order to make sure Iran won't reach the nuclear weapon.
Both President Naftali and President Netanyahu have been very publicly opposed to any form of deal with Iran. Surely a bad deal is better than no deal?
First of all, at the moment, let's just explain. I think many people don't really understand what's a bad deal, what's a good deal, what exactly this whole JCPOA is all about. So we are speaking after the first JCPOA was signed, and the major problem is, and today I'm speaking not on behalf of the State of Israel, but on behalf of the official organ that is supposed to say where Iran stands with its nuclear abilities, and it's the IAEA. We have just seen in the last few weeks where the IAEA is saying very clearly that Iran is enriching uranium in the way that brings it very close to nuclear abilities that are very, very dangerous for the point of view of America, or the point of view of the UK, and the point of view of Israel, the Gulf countries, basically whoever wants a better future both to our region and to our civilization. So when it comes to the results of the JCPOA, obviously it didn't stop Iran, both from creating more and more abilities in order to get to where it wants to get with the nuclear abilities. So for us, it's very clear that the JCPOA has failed. So we're not talking just from hindsight point of view. We said that to begin with. And it definitely wasn't effective in stopping the Iranian regime. And we know at the moment the international community, at least our allies in the UK and our American friends, know that at the moment it looks like we're far away from a new deal. And in a way, a new strategy about Iran should be planned. And this is where we stand at the moment.
Speaking of nuclear weapons, it is often said that Israel's nuclear arsenal is the worst kept secret in the world. I'm sure you can't comment on this, but if the Iranian government thinks that Israel has a nuclear arsenal, do you not understand why they would wish to develop one of their own?
I want to say something very clear. When we are dealing with a dangerous regime that couldn't care less about human rights, that basically is saying, I want to eliminate another country in the world. We're not speaking about the UK having nuclear weapon. We're not speaking about France having nuclear weapon. We are speaking about a very dangerous country that has radical plans of what to do with this power. So with all the respect, this is not a thing that we can even start, discussing, because the British government is clear. This is a dangerous regime, wants to use the most radical and the most powerful weapon in the world against other countries in order to eliminate it. So I think it's quite clear that we shouldn't encourage the process. I think it's good enough, because again, we are dealing not with France or the UK, we're dealing with Iran.
On Sunday, an Iranian colonel was gunned down outside his house by motorcyclists, and Iran has heavily suggested that they think Israeli security forces were behind the attack. How do you respond to these accusations?
I don't respond to those.
Fair enough. Do you think this is a political ploy from Iran, or?
I said loud and clear, we have at the moment mutual enemy to the West, to the Gulf countries, and to Israel, and we're all addressing this issue, and we're all fighting it together. We're sharing intelligence with the UK officials, we're sharing intelligence with our American friends. We're doing everything in order to prevent from Iran to have nuclear weapon. I think it's clear enough.
There's been a shift in sort of the attitude towards both Iran and Israel from the current US administration. Does Israel feel slightly let down by the Biden administration's approach to Middle Eastern diplomacy?
First of all, our friendship with the Americans, friends always have things that they don't agree on. This is part of a healthy friendship, I believe. But the values we believe in, the fact that America doesn't have a better ally than Israel, and here in the UK, definitely the alliance is stronger than ever. I think we're never disappointed from countries that think different. And again, the most important thing I think in diplomacy is we have an open dialogue with our friends, so they know where we stand. We share information, we share our perspective about certain things. And on this thing that is our top national security issue, we definitely have an intimate dialogue both with our American friends and with our British friends. So I don't see here a matter of disappointment.
When you were referencing the chants from the members and non-members outside, you claimed that the narrative that is often spun is that Israel should not exist. But you said recently in your answer that Israel is not in the place it was 50 years ago. Israel's defense, it looks after by itself. And it is true, Israel is not where it was in 1967 or before. If you do not believe there is a serious threat of Israel being wiped off the map, why is such a hostile approach maintained to Iran and, as we'll move on to now, Palestine?
It's totally two different things. Between us and the Palestinians, there is a national conflict going on for 100 years. Between us and the Iranian people, there is no conflict at all. For many years, Israel had a very strong ties with the Iranian people. There was a thriving Jewish community in Iran. It's a totally different story. This regime is very radical, so we always make a very clear difference. The regime is the problem, and the regime at the moment wants to have all the power in order to eliminate Israel, and it says that out loud. So I think that as much as we want to think about ourselves as a strong country, when you have a serious enemy that wants to have the most dangerous weapon in the world, you need to address the problem. So this is the Iranian issue, and as I said, it's the top priority in our national security issues. When it comes to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, we're speaking about, they are our neighbors. We want to see a better future. We're making tremendous efforts in order to work on peace from bottom to the top, because we're trying to build a people-to-people cooperation. The future of the economies is definitely on a joint, work. Let me give you just one simple example maybe from my experience. One of the things I loved to do was to go into factories that have Palestinian workers that work together with Israelis. And it's such a beautiful thing to see that the economy in our region is based on both people's, labor and work. And I think one of the tragedies that many people that think that are trying to promote peace, they're trying to segregate between Israelis and Arabs. Something that is totally impossible. Think about it, 20% of Israel's population is Arab Israelis. We live together, and the concept of segregation is something that I think is the wrong concept.
You've said on several occasions whilst you sat in the Knesset that you think that Palestine has no claim to the Palestinian territories. Do you still believe this?
When I speak here, I'm speaking as the ambassador, as you know, so you can't ask me political questions, but I can tell you what the Israeli government point of view is. We believe that we need to promote peace, and in order to do that, the biggest question is how we cooperate and how we create better opportunities to have peace in the future. As I said, the biggest problem at the moment is the fact that there is Hamas mindset that is being part of, the very basic idea of what people are saying about the future. And part of this Hamas attitude is the fact that many people are not speaking anymore about territories. They're speaking about Jerusalem as the place that they want to put in flames. We've seen just in the last month that they're trying to destabilize Jerusalem, that is the capital of the Jewish people for 3,000 years. So I think again, the issue is how to promote peace, and this is what the Israeli government is trying to do. And I'm very proud to be part of a country that knows that we should always work hard in order to achieve peace.
If the issue is Hamas, then surely Israeli relations with the government in the West Bank could be more favorable than the attitude towards the Gaza Strip.
But there is no, at the moment, a leadership that wants to negotiate peace. Peace in the past was always, accomplished through a direct negotiation. The last time we were holding negotiation, it was during the Barack Obama administration. I think we had maybe the most energetic and the most full of motivation Foreign Secretary there, and he was trying to do everything that he could in order to put the two sides to speak. But then almost any time in history that the conversation between the Israeli side and the Palestinian side failed, it was because the Palestinians left the table, and I'm afraid that was the case. So the PLO leadership, time after time, left the negotiation table. In a way, they don't believe in a direct negotiation, which is the only way to reach peace. And I think that maybe this is where it's a weakness in their ability to be able to even speak about it.
Whilst it is true that in lots of the peace processes, it has been the Palestinian side who have left the negotiation table. Over the past few decades, and particularly in the last 20 years, the areas of the West Bank that Israel has been prepared to discuss sovereignty over has shrunk dramatically. In the 1990s and the 2000s, Israel was willing to discuss a return to 1967 borders, and then in the early 2000s, discussing the borders as defined by the Oslo Accords, and that has sort of been seen in the last few years to no longer be acceptable to the state of Israel. Why has Israel hardened its stance on the territory it's willing to assert a claim on?
Let's go back maybe to the very basic question about what is the conflict all about. Is it about territory? So, as you know, historically, the Palestinians were offered so many times to have Arab state next to a Jewish state. It started from a very famous historic idea that was born here in this country in 1937, and then moved on to 1947. Every time in the past, they never agreed to have an independent state. And I think part of it is because the conflict was never really about territory. The conflict, and this is the thing that I claim here, and if you check the Palestinian leaders and the way they speak, This is unfortunately the tragedy of why it's not about negotiating territory. It's because they refuse to recognize the right of the Jews to have their own state. And I think the part of the misunderstanding of the conflict is when people are trying to say, wait a second, you can do this and you can do that, but they're not listening to the Palestinian side that is saying, this is not about territory, because in 2000, Israeli Prime Minister called Ehud Barak offered basically the whole deal. He offered to divide Jerusalem, he offered to give in almost all the territories in Judea and Samaria. The answer was always the same, the answer was no. And then a Palestinian leadership was changing between Yasser Arafat and Mahmoud Abbas. Still, when it came to the same point with Netanyahu, the answer was, and with Ehud Olmert, the answer was, of course, Olmert was offering a different deal than Netanyahu. But with Olmert, that was probably the most generous offer the Palestinians ever got. He left the negotiation table.
Why has the offer changed, though?
It changed for the good for the Palestinians throughout the years.
Why is Netanyahu, why is the current state of Israel not willing to offer what Barak offers?
With Netanyahu, they weren't willing really to negotiate. It didn't get even to the point where they were willing to speak.
So would, if the Palestinians were happy to come to the table?
I'm giving you the answer. So the answer is because the conflict is not about territory. The conflict is really whether Israel should exist. And many of the people that were dealing with negotiation with the Palestinians, they had the sad conclusion that the issue is really not about where is the territory for the Palestinians. The question and the issue is whether Israel will exist.
So there's no world in which now the state of Israel would return to the negotiating table and offer what Barak offered in 2000?
I think at the moment there is no Palestinian leader that is willing to have direct negotiation. So I think in a way the biggest question is how you start. And we believe that by the time that the leadership of the Palestinians will realize that we need to have a better future together and think about more creative formulas to have better future to our region, we still need to work on the bottom-up piece, which is, again, as I said, economy, just to work about education, I think, which is the most important thing.
One more question from me before we open up to the floor, which is, do you think that hardening of opinion about what's willing to be offered to Palestine or willing to be considered in a theoretical negotiating table has coincided with the levels of mass migration often supported by the Israeli government into the West Bank and the migration of over 500,000 Israeli citizens into the West Bank over the last few decades?
So again, now I'm speaking on behalf of the Israeli government. The Israeli government sees Judea and Samaria as integral part of Israel. It means that for many years, we always thought that the Jewish people have deep connection to this piece of land. And the truth is, the Jewish communities there are 3% of the land. So it's not really the territory that it takes. This is the right of a Jew to live everywhere in London. And if some neighborhoods in London, Jews are not allowed to live in, or some places in the UK, Jews will be not allowed to live in, you'll be shocked. You probably will call the police and will say, this is a cruel anti-Semitism. And it's definitely the same when it comes to the Jewish homeland. Jews can live everywhere in their homeland, and we always believe that there is no such a place that in the Jewish homeland that should be not allowed to Jews to live. And we think that the same with Arabs. I mean, you have Arabs living in Jerusalem, you have Arabs living in Haifa, you have Arabs living in Lod and Ramle. So many cities in Israel are mixed cities, and we are proud in our coexistence.
Is there not a difference between being able to live somewhere and being financially supported by the state to move and live somewhere?
I wish the state of it, many people, that we have a massive housing crisis in Israel, so I'm sure many people would have said, I wish we would have got the support in living some places in Israel. We do try to encourage people to live in the north side of Israel and in the south, because this is the Israeli periphery, but I can't say the same about Judea and Samaria. I mean, the biggest support that Israel is giving at the moment is to people who want to live in the north and in the south. But basically, again, some of the places in Judea and Samaria are extremely expensive. all I can tell you is, again, this is part of the Jewish homeland, and we see the Jewish communities were never a barrier to peace. And the last American administration, it was during the Trump administration, said very clearly, settlements are not an obstacle to peace, which was, I think, refreshing to hear, because as I said, in 2005, when we removed our settlements, the answer we got for that was firing thousands of rockets on cities in the south side of Israel. So apparently settlements were not the issue.
Anyway, we'll now turn to questions from the audience. Please raise your hand or your membership card. I will call on you. Please stand up when a microphone gets to you and ask your question. I ask you all to be polite and abide by the forms of the House. There is no right to reply, because I want to get through as many questions as possible. So once Her Excellency has given her answer, please sit down and enjoy listening to the next question. So please raise your hand or membership card if you'd like to ask a question.
Can you please just tell the students to say what fields they're studying here in Oxford?
Yes, of course. So please stand up, say your college and your subject. We'll go to the member in the yellow jumper.
Thank you very much.
Oh, wait.
It's the notes on there. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I will try and keep it brief because I know that other people have lots of questions. My name is Hamza. I go to University College. I study chemistry. Assalamu alaikum. That means peace with you. I want to talk, Madam Ambassador, about the government that you represent, your government. To this day, and since its inception, the Israeli government has forcibly and violently displaced hundreds of thousands of Palestinians and denied them their right to return. Palestinians living in Israel are routinely and systematically denied their basic human rights of self-determination, food, water, a right to a lawyer. Children are held without charge and kept for long periods of time in military courts and separated from their parents. In Gaza, your government has created some of the worst living conditions on this earth. It's called an open-air prison by the UN, and Israeli arms companies regularly shoot into Gaza to test their weapons and market them as battle-ready. In Jerusalem, the IDF occupation force targets Muslim worshippers, brutalizes them at the Al-Aqsa compound. In Hebron, they separate buses and streets so that Palestinians could walk on one side and Israelis on another. Your government does not consider Palestinians to be full citizens or even human beings worthy of the same rights as an Israeli Jew. So my question to you is about Hamas, which you mentioned several times during your speech. Do you not believe, what is the difference between a terrorist organization and a government? Because you mentioned that Hamas routinely kills Israeli civilians, so does Israel. You mentioned that Hamas routinely calls for the denial of the existence of the other side, so does Israel. Israel fires into Gaza very regularly. So what do you think, Madam Ambassador?
Your name is Hamza. I first of all, the part that I agree in the question of Hamza is the salam alaikum. I really think that the opening was really, really nice about the things you described. So some of the things, unfortunately, and I don't know where you get this information from, but this is my duty to share with you to clear some of the things that are being mentioned as claims toward the Israeli policy. Let's start maybe with the easiest question. What's the difference between Hamas as a terror organization and acts of Israeli army when we're defending ourselves? It's very simple, and it has international definition. Terrorism is when you use your force in order to intimidate innocent people. Israel never targets civilians, and this is the truth. And whoever wants to say different will have to deal with, I would say, people that are professional in how Israel is using force. It's very clear that Israel is using force in the way that will attack only terror targets, as opposed to Hamas. Hamas was firing just in the last Gaza conflict rockets to kindergartens. Obviously, kindergartens are not, a legitimate target according to international law. So they're firing to schools, to kindergartens, to sometimes, unfortunately, they even hurt Arab citizens. So what I think is that it's very clear, according to international definition, when you use your force in order to hurt civilians, innocent people, this is when you use terror. And when you're using your army in order to defend your civilians, and you're not targeting civilians, you're targeting just terror targets, this is where we're doing what any other army in the world is doing when it's defending its people. So I think the first thing is very, very clear. And we know terrorists here from this country experienced many years of, terror attacks. I was just walking the other day in London Street and I asked some people, did you notice London doesn't have beans? I mean, I just wanted to throw something. And one of my security guards said, yes, historically it's because the IRA used to put bombs in bins and we got rid of them, so people won't be under danger. So this country has massive history with attacks, with civilians being attacked, with terrorism in your streets. You know the difference, and this is my answer. We never target innocent people, we never target civilians. The second question is about Gaza as a big prison. Well, Gaza is being led by elected terror organization, and it has an address of who should be blamed for the circumstances of the people of Gaza. Israel doesn't control Gaza. Israel doesn't have settlements in Gaza. Israel made a clear withdrawal in 2005 to the international border. And by the way, one of the questions many people should ask themselves, do we want to duplicate the Gaza case to other areas in our region? The answer of both Jordan and Egypt will be probably no. We don't want to have a second Gaza. If the results of having an election and choosing Hamas as the legitimate leadership of the Palestinians of Gaza, this is unfortunately a horrible tragedy, I think. But you need to blame Hamas for causing all this pain to the people of Gaza. By the way, Jews are being hurt as well on the other side from thousands of rockets being fired time after time to our cities, and as I said, to kindergartens and to schools. So again, you asked me about certain things, and you don't ask yourself, where is the Palestinian responsibility? One of the things you were asking is about why Palestinian refugees are not being let in. So I will answer for that. There is no country in the world, I can give you thousands of examples, that after a war and people are settling in a new country, they're not calling their children and their grandchildren refugees. When people are immigrating to a country, whether they're refugees or not, their children are legitimate citizens of another country. When you go to Lebanon, when you go to some places in Jordan, you see refugee camps of people that are fourth generation after a war, and they still call themselves refugees. My husband is a grandson of a refugee. His grandfather was a Holocaust survivor. His grandmother was living in a beautiful house in Austria. Do you see my husband looking for the house of his grandmother in Austria in order to get back his property and everything after what the Germans did to the Jews? It doesn't make sense, isn't it? And the reason it doesn't make sense is because any other country and civilization in the world is making sure that the people will have a new life. Many of the people that came to Israel, unfortunately, were refugees, some of them from Arab countries, some of them from Europe. And they built a new life. No resources. Israel was a very poor country when it started, but they built a new life. Why the Arab leadership keeps on, I'm saying again, this is something that the UN it's very famous. When the UN is giving money and budgets to refugees, it never looks at grandchildren and grandchildren as refugees. There is only one generation that can be a refugee after a war. The Palestinians are exceptional. And I think this is the point where we need to ask the questions. Why so many generations after a war, they still see themselves as refugees? Doesn't make sense, never happened in any other place in the world, and the international community is not recognizing refugees from other places in the world as refugees 70 years, it's already 74, after war happens. So I think those are the questions we need to ask.
We'll go to the gentleman in the tie.
Hi there, thanks so much for coming, and thank you for all the work that you do. Recently, Israel actually signed a document in the UN Human Rights Council condemning China's current genocide of the Uyghur people. So what exactly motivated Israel to move to actually do that action, and what are the future policy initiatives that Israel will support to stop that horrific genocide taking place in Xinjiang province in the People's Republic of China?
Well, I think on this we work on a larger coalition. It's not like it's Israel's, we're not standing alone on this. And I think this large coalition, again, is coming from like-minded countries, freedom-loving countries, like the Foreign Secretary in this country loves to say. And again, Israel is a very small country. Obviously, China is a huge country, and it needs to be, this is one of the biggest powers in the world, maybe very soon the strongest economic power of the world, and it needs to be addressed in coalitions. So as you said, we do what we do as part of the bigger group of the people that care about human rights all around the world.
I think we have time for one more question. We'll go to the gentleman.
I would like to have ladies asking as well, if it's okay. No, but of course, you can ask a question, just give another lady to ask.
We'll do two more then.
Okay.
Gentleman in the blue shirt, back.
Madam Ambassador, thank you for taking the time to be here with us. I understand being a worker of an apartheid genocidal state, you might not have that much time, so I do really thank you for being here. You speak of human rights. Where were human rights when journalist Shahrin Abu Akleh was killed by an Israeli bullet, and then her body wasn't even allowed to be buried peacefully? Israeli death squad was there, rocking that casket back and forth, images that were plastered everywhere. Where were human rights that day that you speak and hold so dearly to yourself? Thank you.
Thank you. So, I was expecting to get a question about the tragedy of the loss of life of Shireen Abu Akleh. I want to start with a big sympathy to a journalist that was killed in a crossfire. But we need to understand why Israeli forces was there to begin with. And also, we need to understand that at the moment, as we speak, no one knows what's the bullet and where it came from that killed Shireen Abu Akleh. And the reason I'm saying we don't know is because just after Shireen was killed, our foreign minister called his Palestinian colleague and he said, we want to go for a joint investigation. Just to understand, the investigation is very simple. The Palestinians and the Israelis are using totally different weapons. It's very, very easy to understand who shot the bullet. The Palestinians refused. There was a Palestinian doctor, an official Palestinian, that was interviewed at the same day of the occasion. And he said, we don't know who shot Shireen Abu Akleh. So the first thing that I want all of us to sit in this room, after really feeling the sympathy to her family and to understanding this is a horrible human tragedy, is to say we can't blame the Israelis as an automatic thing, because we don't know. And sometimes it's okay to say we don't know, but we need to ask the question why the Palestinians refused to have joint investigation. We didn't ask it to be Israeli investigation. We said a joint investigation. So I think, again, unfortunately, journalists get caught in crossfire as part of their professional duties. And we feel bad for any loss of human life. But to blame the Israelis is definitely not the way to go. And we need to understand again why IDF was acting in Jenin, the place where it happened. IDF was going to a massive terror net that was in Jenin that created 19 Israelis being brutally murdered in our streets just last month. And sometimes the story is not being told. 19 Israeli people have names, have children, have parents, and this is a horrible human tragedy. And they weren't killed in crossfire or in some mistake. They were brutally murdered deliberately as innocent people in the streets of Bnei Brak, Hadera, Be'er Sheva, Tel Aviv, in a pub while they were having fun with their friends. I think this is the big tragedy, that we tell only one side of the story. Israelis always take responsibility, and we are always open to investigate. We're not saying we're perfect, but we definitely don't target either journalists or innocent people. But 19 Israelis were killed, and no one really paid attention. It wasn't getting headlines, not in the Times, not in the BBC. It wasn't getting a big, a big response of how come people in 2022 can be brutally murdered in the streets of their homeland using axes and knives. And this is, I think, part of the reality we live in. We need to understand the context, the big story, and still after and having said that, we don't know what bullet killed Shireen Abu Akleh, but we feel that we are doing everything we can in order to prevent the loss of human life, whether they're journalists or not.
Thank you very much. I'll have time for one more question then, if there's any female member of the audience who'd like to ask a question to Her Excellency. Her Excellency did ask for a female.
No, but I can't. I mean, if there are any, so.
Yeah, we'll go to the gentleman in the blue shirt.
It's okay.
Yeah, thank you for the talk as well. I'm Sam. I go to St Hugh's and I do archaeology and anthropology. I wonder what you thought of, in British Jewry, especially amongst young people, there's often a move to criticise settlement building and activity in the settlements. And that seems to be, British Jews who love the state, who love Israel, who are Zionists, they kind of focus attention on the settlements. And whilst they want to have, they want to have a constructive approach to the conflict, settlements is often focused on. And I wondered what you would say to them.
Can you just repeat the question?
Could you just repeat the opposite bit of the question?
Yeah, basically, what would you say to like young British Jews who are quite liberal in attitude and kind of focus on settlement building and the issues with settlements as an obstruction to peace?
But the question is about
how would you speak to British students whose biggest concern is about the state of Israel as settlement building? So
you're asking me what to say when the settlements issue is being raised.
Yeah, but specifically to young British Jews who see that as the main issue that's an obstruction to peace.
Okay, it's a very fair question because again, it's one of the biggest questions people have been asking me. So the most important thing to understand is, first of all, that the conflict has nothing to do with settlements because the conflict was started 100 years ago. So before we can speak about what happened in 1967, the conflict didn't start in 1967. So we must start from this point. Because many people, it's not like people care whether people build houses here or there. I always say kindergartens don't create massive war attack. It's ridiculous almost to say that certain houses can create a clash between people. Basically, if you go and walk there and travel there, you can see how much space there is. It's not like someone is taking someone's house. So I think the basic and fundamental idea behind the question about settlements is the concept thinking and the myth that if there wouldn't have been settlements, then things would have been okay. So two answers for that. First, the conflict has been going on for 100 years, so it has nothing to do to 1967 settlements being built after 1967. And the second thing, which I think is even stronger, in 2005, Israel committed the first experiment of how the world looks without settlements when it comes to some kind of, better future between us and the Palestinians. In 2005, Israel uprooted 7,000 Jews with their houses. Personally, for me as a young person, it was the first time that I've seen Jews being uprooted from their houses by Israeli government. And it was a big drama in Israel. And the result, unfortunately, was worse. People on the other side didn't feel like settlements are solving the problem. Actually, they saw like they can access now the real settlements, which is, Jaffa, Tel Aviv. They see the whole Israeli communities basically as settlements. And I think this is the biggest problem. When it comes to Jewish communities and the international law, which is another issue, it is important to know that according to international law, and this was the Israeli case for many years, we have a total legitimacy to build communities there because the Jews have 3,000 years of connection to those places. We are not occupying our own land, as we like to say. And one of the things that is also important to understand, when Israel was getting the territories in 1967 in a defense war, a totally legitimate war according to the international law because we were under attack, the occupier was the Jordanians. The illegal occupier was the Jordanians. There was never like a Palestinian state there. It's not like we occupied it from Palestine. No, it was the Jordanians that were holding it illegally. And basically there was not a legal sovereign to the land. So Israel Israel and all Israeli, legal experts will always say Israel has a legitimate claim on Judea and Samaria because of long Jewish history and also according to international law.
I'm afraid that's all we have time for, ladies and gentlemen. But thank you very much for being a
I would like to thank you all for coming. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Charlie.